thanks a lot for everybody for joining. So we're going to be building on what we talked about on our last session on Tuesday. So on Tuesday, we just for background for people who weren't here, we went through an install of OpenIAM on a Linux environment using an RPM deployment. Today we're going to be focusing. It's going to be the first of really 3 sessions to kind of talk about how we can automate the user lifecycle management. And the reason it's broken up into really 3 parts is because it's kind of a broad topic. So we're breaking it up into small chunks that we can cover in the hour or so that we kind of allocated for each one of these sessions. So today, our again, our scope is going to be fairly basic. We're going to talk about what automated user lifecycle management means, and and give some background to how OpenIAM kind of does these things. And again, and this is because we have a fairly mixed audience and people who are have different levels of exposure to IAM in general and different levels of exposure to OpenIAM, right? We'll go through some of the flows in terms of how OpenIAM processes this data, and then we will go into kind of a little bit more of a lab exercise where we'll go through and install a connector, specifically one for LDAP, and we'll go through the process of registering the connector, getting it connected to the directory, and then importing some data in from there. In the session next week, we will look at basically source data and create business rules and kind of automate like more of a joiner process, right? As I said last time, I like to keep these things fairly interactive. So if you have questions as we go, feel free to post them. I'll do my best to answer them. If I can't, I will follow up and get back to you. Okay, so when we look at what is automated user lifecycle management, and so here what we really are looking at is a automated process where we can take data from one or more source systems, and the source system is something like your HR system. In some industries, say like in higher education, there could be multiple source systems. It could be one for employees, like another one for students. It could be many, right? And in other environments, there might be systems where you have primary authoritative sources, right? But you also have some other systems which are authoritative for certain attributes, right? So the solution that we have must be flexible enough to kind of adapt to this kind of world. So the point is we want to be able to integrate with these source systems and be able to know when new people are being created, when people are changing their roles, meaning that they have changed their job, they moved to a different department or a different division, or they're leaving the firm. And now those 3 topics, those are your join, remove, or leavers processes, but there are a bunch of caveats in between, right? There's for example, people leave and they can come back. So you have rehires. So that adds a little bit of a twist to it. There could be hires and people don't show up. So you can have a no-show, which is more of a rescinded offer. So these additional types of cases are things that's real life, and we have to be able to handle them, right? So when I try to describe the flow in terms of what happens when we integrate with the source system and we have to automate this process, right? So I've kind of described this in very simple terms and using the architecture within OpenIAM. So the first thing is you have a connector, and the connectors are basically pieces of software that talk to a type of application, right? So there's a connector for, in this case, say Workday, but there could be another one for a SQL database. There's a SCIM connector, which talks to any application that supports a SCIM format, right? So we have these integration connectors, and there's a service in front of it, which is called the synchronization service, and it will have some configuration in terms of how this data should be pulled, what data, meaning what the filters, and so it will send a message to the connector to say, when it's ready, go get me, all the new hires, that you have, or it could say, give me all the new hires from the last time that I ran, which would be a incremental process. So you could take that, then it will do some processing. It will call, the authorization service, which will compute what access someone should have. And then it's going to pass it on to the provisioning service, which will, then say, okay, well, these are the different applications. So it will send off a message to each connector and it will log it in Elasticsearch, which is where the audit logs are kept, right? So this is kind of at a very high level. Now, in between there, I have some dotted lines here because sometimes we may need to send out email notifications like, a new person is joining and we need to let the manager know that this person's coming in on Monday. Here's some temporary credentials, right? Or there might be some access that needs approval and we could have a workflow that gets started, right? So all of these things can be integrated into the new hire process. Okay. This slide just goes into a little bit more detail about the logical flow. I'm going to be publishing these slides, so I'm not going to beat this one to death, but it's just basically breaking down in more detail what's actually going on at each step. And again, it's more as you get into this further, the concept of how these pieces fit together will help you at that point, right? But for our conversation today, I don't think it's that critical. Okay. So focusing more on the onboarding process, right? And so when I talk about application onboarding, I'm basically saying that how do I take a new application and let OpenIAM know that it exists and we might need to do some work with it, right? And an application in this case is really kind of a broad term. It's really any kind of an endpoint, right? So it could be, an Active Directory, it could be a Linux server, it could be, an Oracle EBS system or SAP, right? It could be anything that you want OpenIAM to talk to. So we need to turn on that connector. Then we need to let OpenIAM know about it. And after that, we need to create this thing called a managed system, and I'll explain these terms in a little bit more detail. After that, we have a synchronization task, and then finally, we're, you know, yeah, these are the basic steps that we need to follow, and this is what we're going to go through in the session today. Okay. So talking about connectors, um, like I said before, OpenIAM, talks to applications through these connectors. And there's a bunch of connectors that we offer. I think there's about 40 or so out of the box, but it's an open-ended framework. And so if you want to create a new connector, all you need to do is implement a simple interface. And you can do this in Java. You can do this in PowerShell if you prefer. Um, there's some script connectors also, which will save you that effort. But you can create your own connectors. You're not bound by the connectors that we offer. The connectors, the way they fit into the OpenIAM architecture is that they receive messages from RabbitMQ. And this is kind of an important thing, from an OpenIAM perspective. And it leads to the second point that there are really two types of connector deployments. One is what we call local, and the other one is called remote. A local deployment means that it's running on the same box or same infrastructure that the other OpenIAM services are. So generally, these are your Linux servers, and if you have a small deployment or a medium-sized deployment, this is fine. If you start getting into large numbers of applications, it may make sense to kind of move that connector off to a separate VM. You may also want to move it to a separate VM if you have, if it's a hybrid deployment, meaning like you're running part of the solution in the cloud, some of it's on-prem, or you have systems in a different network, right? We can have this VM sitting elsewhere, and as long as the connector can listen to messages from RabbitMQ and respond back to it, we can move these things around, right? And that's where that whole remote connector concept comes from. Now, that being said, there is one type of connector, which in our case, it's all the Microsoft connectors which are by default, they're remote connectors. And the reason being is all of our connectors are written in .NET and PowerShell. And for that, they need a Windows Server environment. And we went down that path is because the whole PowerShell interface, which is what Microsoft supports, gives us the maximum amount of flexibility in terms of how we can adapt to customer needs, right? So again, so just some concepts in terms of how these connectors are, how they're deployed and how they fit together. Okay, so let's go to the first part, which is about registering a connector. So we're going to deploy it and we're going to get it registered in OpenIAM, right? So here are some steps. Basically we're going to download a connector. In this case, we're going to use the LDAP connector because it's a common target. We're going to change the ownership of the file and then we're going to start it up. Okay. So let's shift over to our Linux VM. So there's a question that says RabbitMQ looks to be unencrypted. Is there an option to encrypt this for the connectors? Yes, there is. You can turn on TLS-based communication, and so that would allow you to have have basically secure communication for all things coming in and out of RabbitMQ. So yeah, you can certainly do that. Okay. Adrian, just go ahead and post the question. I think the webinar format doesn't allow us to have an open conversation, so just put it in chat or the Q&A section, and I'll be happy to answer it. Okay, so one second, let me just find, okay, so first thing is, so I'm on my Linux box, and so we deployed OpenIAM over here, I think. This is the default location. Okay. Um, so question is, can multiple connectors run on the same VM or host? Um, they can, I think especially the 80 connectors, you can have them running on the same host. Um, you may want to split them up because by moving them into a separate VM itself. So first of all, let's take a step back. Why would we have multiple connectors? And we would have multiple connectors because we want to increase the throughput of the volume that we want to process. So for that reason, you may stand up a second connector. You may also want to move you may want to move the connector to a second VM. So like if you have two connectors, and this can give you some more high availability as well, right? So different options, but definitely possible. The question is, where can you access the recorded materials? So the session from Tuesday is already up on YouTube. There's a new playlist. It's on the OpenIAM channel there, and this one will go up later on today. We will also add the PowerPoint slides sorry, yeah, the slides with these as well, and where you can pull us. Our plan is that all the presentation material and also the slides that we use and the Groovy scripts that we create will all be kind of made available through a central place. There's a second question about where can you find a list of the supported connectors. On the OpenIAM site, there's a place where we have the current connector list. You can see it there. Okay. I'll see if I can find that for you in a second. But just to keep going, so I've moved over to where OpenIAM was deployed, and you'll see a number of various folders for these different things. The one that we care about right now is the one for connectors. And so what we want to do is we want to create a new directory under this called bin. And we want to basically download. We're going to grab this right from our sheet here. There's about zero chance that I'm going to type that in accurately for the first go around. So connector has been downloaded, and now I'm going to go ahead and change the ownership. And once I do this, then I'm going to go ahead and start the connector. Now, same command can be used to also check the status. and also to stop. So you can do start, stop, and status using this command. Ah, sorry, doing everything wrong. And so it will tell you that the connector is active and it's up and running, right? And if it was stopped, it will tell you that it had stopped. Now, let's go and switch back to the OpenIAM interface. So now that we have the connector started, let's log in here. And the question is, should the connector run as root or as OpenIAM? The connector should be running as OpenIAM. And in fact, let's go and so if you look at that ownership, the change owner command that I ran, it was basically changing the owner to OpenIAM for the LDAP jar, right? So if I come here, if I go into provisioning under connectors, you will see a list of these are some the out of the box connectors which are there. There's an entry for them here already. And the reason was that we just wanted to make it a little bit simpler for people who are new. And you'll see one thing here, which is there's a queue that's mentioned, right? So this is the default queue, and this is the queue that OpenIAM is basically communicating with this connector on, right? Now you can change it, and I'll go there in a second. But part of this also is this. There is a way. So as you'd imagine, right? Different connectors, different parameters, right? So what parameters you may need for, say, a database connector are going to be different than the parameters you need for, say, an AD or an LDAP. And similarly for, say, SAP or EBS, right? So this connector configuration allows us to add additional parameters that we want to capture. So in this case, we're saying we want the target system type, the scope. So basically the whole connector configuration itself can be defined here. So if you build your own connector, you can, indicate what fields you want to be able to capture, right? And then the user would have to fill them out. And you can add new questions here as well, right? So you're not limited by what we provided. So in this respect, this part, it can be expanded out. So the question is, can LDAP and AD connectors communicate with OpenIAM simultaneously? Are you talking about two separate connectors, or are you talking about one connector for AD and for LDAP? If you're talking about using the same connector, you can. So the LDAP connector basically works against the normal directory protocol. So it will work with LDAP, and Open LDAP, OpenDJ. It will work with Novell, eDirectory. It's even worked with IBM's RACF if directory services have been turned on. So one connector can be used to talk to multiple endpoints. So in that respect, you don't need to have separate connectors as long as you've got enough capacity and plan out those kind of things adequately. Um, does the connector list in the UI represent the installed connectors in a Unix system, or no? So these connectors here, they're just basically registration entries. They're not necessarily active. So only if you turn on the connector will this actually kick into effect. And even there, and I'm going to come to this in a second, you can change some of the configuration parameters that the connector is going to use. Okay, so we have the connector registered. Let's just go back to our slide and kind of walk through this step by step. Okay, so registered, we did that. We talked about the different parameters that can be used. And then the next part was, so this is kind of it just so as you work with things in a more production type of setting, Uh, you'll notice that when we started the connector, we did no configuration whatsoever. We took the out of the box scripts and we just did a start. Um, in your environment, you may find that there are things that you need to change. So one of the things that may be different is you may need to change the queue that RabbitMQ is listening on. You may also want to change certain parameters that determine how the connector is going to behave. And again, and if you write your own connector, you'll want to be able to control these things, right? And so with any of the connectors, you can create a application property file. Now, I called it an application.properties, but you can call it anything you want to. And then what you want to do is you want to take this start over here. Let's come back to this in a second. Let's go back out. There is a start and a stop, start sh and a shutdown. You can modify, you can create a copy of this file, and you can, change the parameters. And in down below, you can add an entry in here, which will tell it, well, so you have this Java, ops, the home directory. You can add another parameter here that says, where does this property file live, right? And I would recommend just to keep it organized, having a folder where you keep your connectors and you have one where you keep your property files. That way, if you have multiple connectors, you can keep them nice and organized. You can also here, if you have a large deployment, change the amount of memory that this connector is allowed to have, right? So in like most non-trivial cases, you'll want to introduce your own property file. And so here's an example of what, a customized property file for the LDAP connector might look like, right? Um, so again, so just keep that in mind that you have options in terms of how we can do this. Okay. Um, So the question is, are all these connectors available in the community version as well? LDAP is for sure. There's actually quite a number of connectors which are there for the community version. Initially, there were only about 4 connectors, but the list has been expanded out to be quite a bit. If you go to the OpenIAM portal, like if you register and you go to the community version where you see the RPM download files, you'll also see all the connectors which are available there. So another reason why you may want to increase the memory in the connector is sometimes you can you can have more of a, you can configure your authentication to be it's kind of what we call a managed system authentication, or the delegated authentication, right? Which means that instead of using the OpenIAM data store to authenticate users, you can use your directory. And in that case, you would want faster performance. And, so for those kind of reasons, you may want to change, to the memory and so on and so forth, right? Okay. There is one parameter, which is, you would have seen it on the connector configuration page. It's a parameter called urgent queue. Not the best name for it, but basically what it says is, um, the in the so right now by default, all the messages are kind of flowing over one queue. If you have a large number of users, let's say, for example, you have 100,000 users that you're going to be processing, but you also want to use the same connectors to be able to say, let's say you're using Active Directory, and you want to be able to use AD authentication as well, and you want people to be able to do password resets and stuff all through OpenIAM. Well, in that case, your queue is going to get clogged. And so by turning on this urgent queue setting for the AD connector, it will basically allow authentication requests, your password reset messages to flow through a separate queue, and they will not be stuck in that logjam, right? In 4.2.2, all of the connectors will support this kind of a model, right? There's a question that says, do you have a timeout also in the connector property, just like you do for RabbitMQ? There is a timeout setting. I will get some of that details for you, and we'll add it to the PDF file. and we'll publish it there as well. But yeah, that does come up from time to time, especially on the RabbitMQ side. We do need to manage that, and kind of control that time window. Okay, let's move on to managed systems. So connectors, like I said, are the software that talks to a type of system. The managed systems represent a particular connection to a endpoint. And you can look at it as an endpoint, you can look at it as an application, depending on what you're trying to integrate with. One word may make more sense than the other. The point is that that connection represents something that OpenIAM is going to be managing from a identity perspective. Couple things to keep in mind, that managed systems are really a type of resource. And we will get into this a little bit deeper once we get into the whole ability to kind of provision and deprovision. But in the access control model, there are resources, groups, roles, and organizations and users. So because these are resources, we can control through the access control model things that people are entitled to or not, right? And again, this will fit in more as we get into the business rules and how we grant access to these things. There are two types of managed systems. They are, um, they're basically they're what we call automated managed systems, and they're manual managed systems. So automated managed systems are things that we have connectors for, and manual ones are things that we don't have connectors for. And so oftentimes, customers will either use OpenIAM or they will use, a integration with, say, like either Jira or ServiceNow, and be able to create tickets in there, right? Okay. So a couple of questions. You know, so first question, is it necessary to have any considerations when implementing a custom connector to use the urgent queue functionality? Is this something that OpenIAM Framework manages independently? So right now, that urgent queue functionality is only in the AD connector. It's not something that you need to implement. It will be in the other connectors. If you're writing your own connector and you want to use that capability, we will get some more details for you and how to do that. The second question is, I'm quite lost in the installation steps. Is it possible to share at least the installation instructions just to help people build out a proper environment? We went through this video, these steps last time, and the video is already published. So I think you should be able to follow that to get you up and running. If you're still lost, just drop us a note. Use the OpenIAM community portal, and we'll help you kind of work through wherever it is that you're getting stuck. You can also, I think the steps are, not terribly hard now in terms of, being able to work through this. Okay. Does every connector have its own queue? Yes, it does. And this is why we need to define the queue. So if we look at back here, there is a queue definition. It's called LDAP connector 1. The AD connector has a name called remote connector 1, but you can change this to whatever you want it. You can just say, my LDAP connector 1, right? And as long as if you change it, and you need to just remember to change it on the OpenIAM side, so where you go to the connector settings and define it there. Okay. So let's do this. Let's go and let's set up a connection. Okay. So let's go back to our screen. So we did the we looked at the connector, and let's go to let's go to manage system. Now I'm going to use the existing Open LDAP. I'm going to use this existing one, and I would say if you're new to OpenIAM, use the existing configurations. Don't try to do this from scratch. There are enough little nuances where it will come back and it just won't work, right? It will just frustrate you, right? So just get some success under your belt. So that's so first things in here, it says which connector am I using, right? So it's using the LDAP connector. I gave it a name, give it some descriptive value, make it active, and then I want to start to define, okay, so LDAP's going to be sitting over here. This is I'm just going to update this. We're not using LDAP-S, so 389 is correct. This is the right admin password. And what I want to do is set the base DN. Okay. So this should get us going. What I want to do is because I just restarted this, I just want to go ahead and go to connectors and resave this this queue just to make sure that the queues are connected. And then I'm going to wait a second to see this guy refresh, and let's see what we'll give it a minute or so. So once this is active, um, okay, so the second question is, do you have to define the queue manually in RabbitMQ, or does the connector have some inbound capability to create ones? So if you change it, so like I said, the ones which are there by default, the queue name in OpenIAM and the queue name which is on the OpenIAM side, those are there already. If you change it, then you need to change it in both places. Just need to make sure that they're both in sync, because until they are aware of each other, there is no automatic way to know that this connector is here and this is the queue that's listening to, right? So yeah, it's just so it is a little bit of manual configuration there. Okay. So once we have this in place, um, the next thing is that we need to go to synchronization. Right? So actually, before I go there, let's just take a look. I have an LDAP up, and we have a simple structure with a couple of people in it. So these are what we're going to be importing in, right? Okay, so if I go to synchronization, and I'm going to go find OpenLDAP. So you'll see that there's two predefined configurations here. One is OpenLDAP user, the other one is called OpenLDAP group. If I have like a full directory with a large number of users already in there, um, so there's a question, is it possible to customize the list of attributes managed in the connector, and how? You absolutely can, and I'm going to be covering that in more detail in the next session. There's this topic about the policy map, which lets you define which attributes are going to be controlled. Um, so okay, the in this case we're just going to start with users, and so if I go to this OpenLDAP configuration, right? So a couple of things here is I need to define the managed system that I'm using, right? So this way the synchronization is using the right connection. And then we have the connector, and there's a few different values here. This is the synchronous and multi-threaded. This is what you want to use. This is what goes with version 4218 and beyond. There are other options available here which are more legacy, or if you want to import CSV files, but this doesn't apply. So in this case, use the asynchronous multi-threaded. Tell it what kind of object you want to import. So this is a user, and we want to do a complete sync. You see some other options here. There's a transformation file, which is really mapping data from OpenLDAP into things that OpenIAM understands. And then this one's essential. So when we are pulling data in, we need to tell it which attributes we care about. And this is because like you may have a large number of attributes and we only care about a subset that they don't really, become they're not really possible. We don't really care about them, at this point, right? So let's close this, and we have a filter here, right? And this filter, I've already tried it out in my LDAP browser that it works. So if I save this, and if I do I sync now, if everything's working, I should start seeing some data come through, right? And then the first check that I could do to check is I can go to the log viewer. So this was always going to be a few seconds, or a minute or so behind. It sees, everything that I've been doing has been tracked so far. So it sees that the synchronization kicked in, and it sees that the search was called, got a connector response, and a thread was started, 2 users were imported in. So if we look at, let's just say if we look at this part, right? It's going to tell you some basic things about this query, right? And then it's going to start going deeper with each subsequent thread. The connector response, it's found 2 records, right? This is, the effect of that filter that was sent. Okay. So question is, a couple of questions here. Um, is there any default value of DN, UID, or password to make the connector available? The default value for the DN can really vary from environment to environment. So each customer is going to be a little bit different. And also, you may have a large tree and you don't want the system to just randomly start going out and grabbing it. So the way we have it set up is basically, take the base DN that you have and put that in and have a service account that the connector is going to use and drop that in. So it's not going to magically going to start, creating these things. And the question is, we can see the field validation file. I'm not sure what you mean. If you can elaborate on that a little bit, I'm happy to answer it. The synchronization process has a delta mechanism or run a full sync on okay. So if you, I'm going to come back to that in a second. So a couple of things here, synchronization file. If I look at the thread here, I'm seeing all the data that was pulled in, right? And if I go to my search and I go to JSmith, I will see that the user was created, right? And I have not done a great deal of work here in terms of mapping. So I've got, John Smith, I've got, his job title, um, his email address is mapped in, the phone, well, and the user identity. So he's got an OpenIAM identity, and then he's got his OpenLDAP identity here. Right? So going back to the question was, um, does OpenIAM have a delta mechanism, or is it run in full, is it a full sync? So a couple of ways that you can do the delta. One easy way is, let's go back to our OpenLDAP. If you turn on incremental, this will do an incremental sync, and it will be from any changes that happened from the last time. So on LDAP, it's really easy. There's a timestamp on the record or even an AD that indicates when the last change was. So I can basically take everything that happened from the last time I changed, from when I ran, and it'll give me all the records, and I can process them that way. With the CSV file, let's say again, you have a CSV file, let's say you have 50, 100,000 records. There are 2 ways that you can do it. You can let OpenIAM, evaluate what's new, what's different. So if if it looks at a record and there's no change, it will skip it. If there is a change, it will look at it as a modify, right? Or maybe a termination. Or you can take that process outside of OpenIAM, where you can have a diff that's being generated and generate a CSV file which only has your changes. Now, if you do that, it will save some processing on the OpenIAM time, and you could potentially speed things up, that way. But anyway, at this point, from what we have done so far, we have taken data that was in one system and brought them into OpenIAM. Um, these transformation scripts that are here, we will build them out a bit more, and we will, also publish them so that you can look at them, along with the other configurations which are here, right? A couple of things also to note is when you're doing the sync, you need to define the attributes that you care about. You need to make sure that there's a mapping here. Now, you can edit these files directly in OpenIAM if you want to, and there's a browser-based editor. And if this works for you, great. For me, I have a slightly hard time with this, so I can also go back to the file system. And if I go back here, somewhere over here, there is, if you go to conf, you will see IAM scripts. And you will see under the synchronization, you'll find all your scripts there, right? But these are all the various scripts which are available, and you can see them, so you can edit them here if you want to. The question is there a predetermined capacity for connectors based on a number of records in one batch? So it is pulling on a number of records in a batch. The default value for a batch is set to 1000, and in that properties file, you can change that if you like. So last thing I want to show you is also in an RPM deployment, there is this folder here for logs, and all the logs for the various services can be found here. So if you need to sometimes troubleshoot, you can come here and you can take a look at the logs. But also remember, you can also use the OpenIAM CLI to go look at the logs as well, right? So just keep that in mind in terms of as you're kind of troubleshooting where you need to look. That's all we had kind of planned for our session today. Okay, sorry, there's one more question. Will you be addressing Microsoft AD and Exchange connectors in a future lecture and explain the contents of connectors.ps1? I hadn't planned on doing AD and Exchange, but we can do this. We can create a separate video, around that, and we can cover AD in more detail, and an Exchange as well. And yeah, we can work from there. Okay. And the question is, can you show where are the logs for troubleshooting the connectors? So this is exactly what we're looking at. So for example, if I look at say, let's see, the LDAP, right? So there's nothing that was actually generated, right? But there are a couple other things that you should keep in mind. So remember, we just did a synchronization, right? So synchronization could also be another place that you look at if you need to troubleshoot the logs. And so if I remember correctly, right, so you can say, OpenIAM, CLI, right, we can get the status. And so let's say we can do, let's say, you know, I think actually it's log. uh, And this will give you again, this is what was going on during the synchronization, and you can troubleshoot in this way as well, right? So I think it's just easier to use the CLI. It's a little bit more flexible, but you can go to the log files directly as well. But this is all that we had planned for today. We will get deeper into the whole joiner mover lever process, and we'll kind of go from there. So thanks everybody for your time, and we'll connect next week.